Hey, everything's up. I'm just adding the last piece now. But I think I got everything, bro.
You do. Can you put this away?
Yeah. Everything else is plugged in, pulled out. Hey, Keith. Bless your heart, buddy. Hang on a second. Sorry.
Since we're going to pass the mic back and forth, can I move the chairs a little closer together, or will that ruin things with your camera?
What?
Sorry. Since we're going to pass the mic back and forth, I was just wondering if I could move the chairs a little closer, or will that hurt where you got
No,
the camera
not
placed?
at all. I mean, it wouldn't bother me. There's nothing that you can do.
Okay. All right.
And I apologize if I'm a little bit, it's been a full day already. Maya, just to remember that you are sitting right in the same row as the camera. You see the camera?
It's a camera.
So when you stand from where you are sitting, just be mindful that the camera is right there.
Oh, no, it's easier to remember because
I'm just making sure you know. We're happy to share that. Or we can use that one.
Hello, testing.
Okay, is that working? All right, welcome. This is another session in our series of getting to know our staff. And I have been told that when we had the first interview with Victor, someone approached Sally afterwards and said, "Can we do this with Michael Conley?" So, we're here today to get to know Michael a little better, and this is particularly fun for me because in 2015, I called Michael to give him our first little phone interview. And from that phone call, I immediately sensed Michael's depth of introspection, his sincere desire to inspire others with music, and that he was just a man overflowing with ideas. And I immediately was excited to tell the rest of our search team about him. And so, 7 years later, here we are again, and we are still having fun getting to know Michael. So Michael and I are going to talk for a while, and then towards the end, we'll open it up for a couple of questions. So if you have some burning questions, just sit tight with them, and we'll try to get to you towards the end. All right, so we're just going to start at the very beginning, kind of like Do Re Mi, but we won't ask you to sing. We're going to start at the very beginning, and Michael, tell us where you were born and where you grew up.
I was born in Casper, Wyoming, so I am one of the, among the smallest group of natives in the United States. Wyoming has the smallest population of any state, and people actually born there, so it's rare. Yeah. We have no family connection to Wyoming at all. My dad just had been out of college, got offered a job with an oil company, and they sent him to Casper for his first job. So that's where I was born. And they lived there for 10 years. And when I was 8, we moved to Virginia. So I kind of think more of Virginia as my home, I guess, because I went to most of elementary school and junior high and high school and college in Virginia. And that's where my family still lives. So, yeah.
Okay, you're kind of a Westerner and a Southerner.
Yeah, kind of. Which makes sense because my mom is from Colorado and my dad is from Louisiana. So I sort of am both of those things anyway.
All right. Tell us a little bit about your family, maybe a little bit about any musical background or the religious background in your family.
Yeah, like I said, my mom's from a small town in Colorado called Pagosa Springs, which is in the southern part of the state. It's a very beautiful place. And my dad is from Lafayette, Louisiana, the heart of Cajun country. And we have some fans. Okay. And they met because my father dropped out of college his freshman year because he just didn't know what he wanted to do and decided to join the Navy. And they sent him to nuclear power training school, which of all the weird things was in Idaho. I guess on some lake in Idaho they had a Navy base. base where they trained people in using, running nuclear-powered engines and all this stuff. So his friend, who was there with him in the Navy, invited him home on a break, on leave, because my dad didn't have enough time or money to go all the way back to Louisiana, so he went with his friend to Pagosa Springs and was introduced to my mom, and they got engaged 9 days later, and were married like a month later, so it was a real love story, I guess, in some ways, so.
Thank you. And did you have any musical influences as you were growing up?
Yeah, certainly. The church, for one thing, because my parents were very active, and my dad, but they were both in the choir, so I had to sit in the congregation with various elderly ladies while my parents sang in the choir, which I loved. And I loved church, and I loved getting dressed up. I had a 3-piece suit when I was 6 years old, which I insisted on wearing every Sunday. And most of the time I sat with a woman named Shirley Spraker, who it got very confusing because a very popular hymn in the Baptist church is "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me," and I always thought they were singing about her, Shirley's goodness and mercy. And I was like, oh my God, it's so cool! They're singing about the lady I sit with in church. But anyway, so it was a Southern Baptist church, which musically had its ups, and many other ways, I would say, in retrospect, had a lot of downsides, but it is what it is. So yeah, the church was an influence, and my parents were pretty musical. My dad played the French horn in school, and my mom played the piano and the clarinet, and they both sang in the choir. And beyond that, my great aunt, Laverne, on my mother's side, was a professional musician. She taught music at North Texas State and at Florida State for many years, and played the violin and composed. And every time I got to spend a minute with my great aunt Laverne, it was just like heaven for me. My first instrument was the violin, well, after piano, partly I think because I was inspired by her. And whenever she would come to visit, we would sit and play just the violin parts from Mozart's string quartets and things, and she was amazing. I loved her. So she was a big influence on my early development, for sure.
Thank you, Aunt Laverne. So, at what point did you start exploring other instruments, and how many instruments have you played?
A few. The piano was the first. Well, actually, technically, the auto harp was the first instrument I ever played, but I'm not sure we really consider the auto harp an instrument. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I started the auto harp, but I begged my parents to get a piano. We had some old junky piano in our garage when we lived in Wyoming, but it didn't really play. And I was 8 years old when we moved to Virginia, and I had been pestering my parents to get a piano because I really wanted to take lessons. So that was the first thing they bought when we moved, was a piano, and I started lessons like within a week of moving there with a very old woman named Blanche Pitts, and she was quite a character. She lived alone in this lovely house on the water and had an enormous poodle that was bigger than I was, and she painted. She had easels all over the house full of her paintings, and she was a great teacher, but she must have been 90 when I started, and eventually I switched to a different teacher. But then I started violin, and then in 7th grade I took up the oboe in band, and that sort of became my main instrument. And I ended up going to college as an oboist.
Okay, all right. And when did you realize that you not only had an interest in music, but had a real gift for music? Do you have any recollection of when that struck you?
I don't know. I was obviously interested in it because I wanted to play the piano so badly when I was little, and every time I would go to church and there was a piano just sitting there, I would just sort of bang on it and play things. know when I realized I had a gift or a talent for it. I don't think we're that self-aware when we're kids, maybe, so it was just something I was interested in, and I pursued it, and I loved doing it. Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to answer when I thought it was a gift. I guess people tell you that, and maybe it takes a certain, you have to be a little older to understand what that means, I guess, to appreciate it in a way. So maybe sometime in high school, I kind of figured out that I actually had a certain ability that maybe not everyone naturally had.
Okay. Well, speaking of high school, music is kind of a big deal with teenagers. What music were you most drawn to, interested in as a teenager?
I was such a geek. Well, band music for one thing, because I was in band, and the band was a really big deal in my high school. We had an amazing band and a wonderful band director who looked like Hitler but was nicer. Well, he was a little nicer. He could be pretty mean, but he was still to this day among probably the top 5 musicians I ever had the privilege of working with. He was just so good. So we had an amazing band. So I was really into band music, and I listened to it a lot. And beyond that, musical theater. I was totally obsessed with classic musicals. My parents had a lot of record albums, and I listened to them incessantly. Everything from West Side Story and My Fair Lady and Brigadoon to Rodgers and Hammerstein and stuff. I loved musical theater. And Into the Woods came out, I think, my junior year of high school, and then I just became absolutely obsessed with that. I must have listened to that record like 9,000 times. And then I picked up this recording of Cleo Lane singing Sondheim. I don't know if any of you know her. She's a British singer who did a lot of jazz and stuff, but she did an amazing Sondheim album that I probably listened to 20,000 times and cried listening to Send in the Clowns every single time. I was also obsessed with Stravinsky, especially, and his ballets in particular, and we had a really big back porch on our house that was enclosed, and that's where the record system was, and when no one was home, I would just put on Stravinsky ballets and dance all around the porch, like for hours. I did my own choreography to the right song. Patricia was my favorite.
Those are videos I would love to see.
So you would not. No one will ever see those. There aren't any videos, thankfully. But I wasn't into pop music really. The only thing I listened to that was pop was Joe Jackson. And only because my brother was into it and he had given me a recording. So I listened to this Joe Jackson album, Stepping Out, like about 10,000 times. And it was really good. So,
Amen.
Yeah.
Another fan. All right, so you then went on to college and graduate school, and at this point in your life, you had been doing musical theater, you were playing multiple instruments, you'd been singing, different things. There were so many different avenues you could have pursued. What did you decide to study, focus on, and what influenced your decision?
I was pretty intent on being a conductor from a young age, like from some point in high school. My mom had bought this collection of Toscanini recordings, and I became kind of obsessed with the idea of a conductor as a larger-than-life figure, and so I was really into conductors, and Bernstein became a huge obsession of mine. He's still alive, and I wanted to be the next Leonard Bernstein. So I was going to be a composer and a conductor and a pianist and all these things, because he managed to do all those things successfully, so why can't I? So I went to college as an oboist because it was practical. I got a scholarship to be an oboe major. But all along, I sort of had this longer term idea idea that you can't go to undergraduate school in music as a conductor. That's not a degree. It's only a graduate level thing. So I had to do something first. So I started off as an oboe major. And I loved the oboe, but I just knew that there was no way it was ever going to be my professional life, because I could not sit in a room making reeds for 10 hours a day. It's horrible. I don't know how any oboist does it. I have so much respect for professional oboists and bassoonists, because they literally spend like 90% of their time making reeds. It's a horrible thing. So I couldn't do that. There was just no way. And gradually over the course of the first few years of being in college, I got less and less interested in oboe and more interested in composition. So I actually switched my degree and I stayed an extra year so that I could be a composition major instead. And that's the degree I ended up getting.
Do you remember any of those early compositions during college?
Oh, yeah, of course.
And what inspired them?
Lots of things. I mean, I was a very fervent sort of evangelical at that point in my life, because that's what I was raised as. So a lot of my compositions were based on religious texts and themes, things from the Bible, Psalms, that sort of stuff. Settings of the Lord's Prayer, Magnificats and Domitices, things. My college choir director was amazing, and he had great range in his interest in music and great taste, and he was an excellent teacher, and we did a lot of cool stuff, and I was exposed to a lot of great music through him. And he was particularly an Anglophile and did a lot of English music, which would not be a surprise to our choir, that is also an obsession of mine. And we did evensong services at a local Episcopal church in college as part of our choral curriculum in our chamber choir. So I particularly fell in love with the Episcopal tradition and all of the great English music written for the church. So that's definitely something that's still, to this day, an influence. But it was an early influence on my compositions, like Herbert Howells and Vaughan Williams and all the great late 19th and early 20th century English composers.
I see, okay. And you, then you went on, you were at Westminster, right, as well. And what was that experience like for you?
It was kind of a mixed bag. I sort of fell into going to Westminster because as I was finishing my undergraduate degree, I was really torn about what to do next with my life. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to pursue an orchestral conducting degree or a choral conducting degree or no degree and just do something, try to just get into the musical workforce and do something. I really wasn't sure. And the conducting program I was particularly interested in only started every other year. You couldn't, it was a very regimented program, and it was a 2-year program, and you couldn't just start any other year. You had to start when the program began, and it was every other year. And I was in the wrong year. So I would have had to wait a year to do that program. And meanwhile, one of my best friends was going to audition for the choral conducting masters at Westminster Choir College. And I just decided to go along with him and audition. And it went well, and I got in. And it just seemed like the right thing to do. I had been getting more and more passionate about choral music, so I decided to go. And in retrospect, it was a great decision, but in the short term, there were a lot of complicated things about it. I had met a woman at the end of college who we got close and became a couple and decided to get married, so I got married right the month that I started grad school. And the weird thing about that is, well, aside from the fact that I was gay, the other weird thing is that I didn't know, I really didn't. People ask that all the time, but I had no idea. I was so deeply in the closet. But I chose the most gay school on the planet, literally. There was no institution of higher learning anywhere on the planet that is more gay than Westminster Choir College. I mean, it's a bunch of choral nerds and organ nerds and conducting nerds, and half of them at least were gay. So I got thrust into this environment as a newlywed who thought he was straight, surrounded by queens who were constantly trying to get me to come out. It was a strange time in my life. And I was constantly torn about what I really wanted to be doing, and I was really into choral music, but I also was really into musical theater, and I wanted to be writing, and I had sort of at this point decided I was going to end up in New York City and be the next Stephen Sondheim. I had moved on from Bernstein, and now I wanted to be Sondheim. And so part of me felt like I was spinning my wheels a little, and I wasn't sure why I was getting this choral conducting degree. But at the same time, Westminster was an amazing place, and I got to be in the Westminster Choir, and we performed with the New York Philharmonic and the Philadelphia Orchestra every few months, and we're at Carnegie Hall repeatedly doing concerts and orchestral concerts, and then we got to go and be the chorus in residence for the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina for 2 months, which was an unbelievable experience. We were the opera chorus, and we did our own concerts, and we did orchestral concerts. And I got to tour with that choir in France. It was my first time in Europe, and we went to Taiwan and South Korea, and then most importantly, the artistic director of the college and director of the Westminster Choir was Joseph Lummerfeld, who was just one of the great choral conductors of the 20th century. He was an amazing musician and an amazing human being. And even though I had sort of constant doubts and reservations, and I had a lot of personal things going on, and being a newlywed and just being generally a very insecure 24, 5, 6-year-old in the world. At the time, I was constantly questioning and a little disappointed about my grad school experience. But later, as I got later into my 20s, and especially in my early 30s, all of it sort of came back to me in a wave, and it's like all the amazing things that I absorbed from this great conductor and human being just sort of washed over me, and I realized what an incredible gift it was to be there. So now, looking back on it in my 50s, I'm just thrilled that I went to Westminster Choir College and that I got to study with Joseph Blumenfeld. At the time, I wasn't so sure. So I think that's true of so many things in our lives. If we could go back and do the things that we have perspective on now, with the perspective that we have now, what we would get out of them. I mean, I would have been a totally different student and person if I had realized what I was going to get out of that experience.
Yes, very, very true. And I didn't realize you had so much performing experience when you were at Westminster. That I can see where that would have carried over too, to so many things you did afterwards.
Oh yeah, it was a very unique thing about that school is that the students are performers and part of these ensembles that constantly are out in the world doing these amazing things.
Right.
I mean, yeah, it was really cool.
So then you were, after you graduated, you've done a variety of things with a variety of churches, and also with some major, very prominent choruses, especially in the New York area. How did some of these then inform a little bit of your journey?
Oh, well, I mean, it's hard to even narrow any of it down. My first job as a choral conductor, I guess, professional, sort of, well, it's hard to call it professional when I look back on it, but it was actually in college. A friend of mine had taken this job at a little United Church of Christ in the country. It was even more in the country than the college itself was. And she decided to transfer schools, and so she was leaving this little job, and she's like, maybe you would like to do it. So I did, and I ended up being there for the next 2 years, and the little 8-person choir in this tiny church. But it was a great experience, and they were wonderful people. And then in college, in grad school, at Westminster, I had a job briefly as a pianist and organist at a church, but then I got a job as the music director at a Lutheran church. So I was there for a couple of years. While I was at Westminster, one of my teachers teachers, who was the accompanist of the Westminster Choir, Nancy Amparella, was an amazing woman who just passed away a couple of years ago. She was the associate organist at a huge church in New York called St. Ignatius Loyola, which is on Park Avenue at 84th Street. It's one of the most respected music programs at any church in the country. I mean, it's a huge program. It's a 16-voice all-professional choir, plus a large community choir, plus a smaller chamber choir that sings at another mass, plus a giant children's music program. They do like 20 to 30 concerts a year, the professional choir with orchestra. They have like another 20 to 30 organ recitals with some of the most famous organists from all over the world. Right when I started there, they had just installed a brand new $5,000 pipe organ, which was a kind of a big deal, a new instrument. And Nancy was the organist there, and she's the one who got me the job. So that was my first job in New York, was at this enormous church. I was the assistant music director. And the music director there, Kent Tritle, is kind of a big name in the choral world these days, although he was more getting started back then. But I learned a lot from him. He was an amazing guy. And just for being in that program and surrounded by all these people, and lots of famous choirs came and performed there regularly, like the Tallis Scholars and Chanticleer, and Yo-Yo Ma did a series of recitals there doing the Bach cello suites, and there were just a lot of really cool people that I got to meet doing that job. But eventually I got tired of that. It was a really hard job. It was a lot of work, many hours a week, and it was very low pay. I was just, the lowly assistant. So finally, I just decided I needed to branch out on my own, and I found a church that was looking for a music director. And at the same time, I got hired by the West Village Chorale, which is the group I ended up being with for the next 15 years. And then shortly after that, I got hired as the assistant conductor of the Collegiate Chorale, which is a choir founded by Robert Shaw. That is still going to this day, although they've changed their name now to the Master Voices. But they had a big Carnegie Hall concert series. So, and they did operas in concert, and they had lots of high-level, big-name soloists who were there. They would hire to be their soloists. And that conductor was crazy. He was so weird. But I learned a lot from him too. May he rest in peace. He also passed away a few years ago. But yeah, he was a character. He used to love to sing soprano in rehearsals. He had this really great falsetto. It was kind of like a male soprano countertenor. So he often chose music that had featured big soprano solos just so he could sing soprano in rehearsal. That's like the Prolane Gloria that has that giant soprano. He would sing the whole thing in rehearsals. And some of that just became about listening to his soprano voice. But anyway, I digress. I had a lot of great experiences in New York. I got to do some off-Broadway plays as the music director. Later on, when I started being the music director at Judson, they had a theater program, and I got to do some productions there as a music director. So I was able to indulge all of my different interests as a musician in New York, being freelance. I got to do theater and choral music and church music. I did some accompanying, I did some coaching, and then eventually I had a high school job, so I taught a high school choir at a private school for almost 10 years. One of my students was Renee Fleming's daughter. So it's an interesting thing having Renee Fleming sitting right behind you in your high school choir concerts. No pressure. So yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff, but also very tiring. It is exhausting being a freelance musician in New York. I will just say that.
Right. But also interesting that you had the opportunity to, outside of churches, to also design a lot of concerts for these other choruses. And so I'm just curious about how that evolved for you, this opportunity to come up with ideas for concerts. You were the artistic director, and tell us a little bit about what goes through your mind as you're thinking about concerts and planning concerts and choosing what you think will inspire others.
Wow, that's a big question. Well, what goes through my mind now is very different, probably than what went through my mind when I was 30 and just starting to do that for the first time. I look back at some of my early programs and I think, oh my God, these poor singers, what I put them through, my hubris and inexperience and not necessarily having a handle on all the things that go into putting on a concert. You know, I remember the first concert I did with the West Village Chorale, you know, and it was a community choir, and at that point they were auditioned, but they didn't have re-auditions, so there were some people that had been in that choir for, 30 years and really couldn't sing anymore. It was all over the map in terms of ability and level, and I programmed this crazy Christmas concert that was like probably 3 hours long and had way too much music and was way too hard, and it was so incoherent. I look back on it and I just think, how did they not fire me after my first year? But thank God they didn't. And I had a chance to sort of grow. And over time, you learn a lot of different things about what makes a good concert, what is interesting, and all the different little parameters that go into programming. It's not just coming up with nice music and putting it on. You have so many things to take into consideration. There's always budgets. How much is it going to cost? What can we afford? There's what singers do I have? What are they good at? What are they not good at? What do they like? What do they not like? There's what is our audience going to respond to? What will they like and not like? How much time do we have to put this on? Do we have the right kind of soloists available if we want to do this particular piece that calls for certain soloists? There's so many parameters into making concerts work, and unfortunately I've had the privilege now of doing this for 30 years, and I've kind of learned more about the process, and I'm sort of able to take some of my ideas for concerts and the inspirations I have for what will make a good program, and they can actually become reality in a positive and successful way now most of the time. Just because I've learned more about how it works and how long it takes to learn a program, and how choosing things in certain languages is going to make that more difficult, or how much of it is a cappella, because that's harder than doing it with an orchestra, all these other things. So there's just so many factors that go into making a successful concert, particularly when you're working with volunteers and you have people that it's not their career, so you have to find ways to do things within the time constraints that you have, but also hopefully you're doing things that are going to inspire people and be exciting. What's exciting to a nerdy professional musician who wants to sing some really incredibly difficult atonal piece is not necessarily the same thing that's going to inspire someone who's showing up because they just love music and want to sing a concert. So yeah, there are a lot of different factors.
You do a superb job of making it all just seem so magical. The experience is always so magical.
Well, don't mess the choir, because it's not always magical behind the scenes.
Well, along those same lines, on Sunday mornings, we get to appreciate the music ministry you provide. And we don't get a chance to really hear, though, what goes into that process. When we hired Michael, we specifically changed his title so that it would be a director of music ministry, thinking of music as a ministry. So if you could briefly just walk us through a little bit how you select, design, program the music for a Sunday morning. What are you hoping to achieve within the worship service, within the hearts of the congregation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first of all, it's a collaboration, so it's not just me. Thankfully, we have a staff that works together to figure out what our services are going to be. We have these 3 great pastors who put their brains together and come up with themes for what the worship is going to be. Sometimes we use these overarching long-range themes like we did for Lent and Easter, the Fold of the Brim series. Sometimes it's just every week is a different thing. So it's a collaboration, and that part of it is wonderful. It's good to be in a room with other creative people and bounce ideas around and work together as a team. But one thing that's, I guess, different about what we do at Calvary than some churches do is that I think the word I'm looking for, and I'm hesitant to use it because it's going to sound cheesy and very contemporary, but we sort of have artisanal services here, and I can't think of another word, but it's like a lot of churches that follow a very strict liturgical model, and like Episcopal and Catholic and Lutheran churches that really have a very proscribed sort of service that you're just plugging in certain elements and you can plan 2 years in advance if you want to. That's a very different experience from what we do because we're sort of reinventing the wheel every week at Calvary, intentionally, in that, yes, we do follow the liturgical calendar, so we know what the readings will be months from now or years from now, but we don't necessarily know what our theme is going to be or what the idea that is tying the service together is, and that's always up to the pastors. So Marcy or Joanna Victor will, whoever is preaching that Sunday, it's sort of their job to pull some overarching concept or theme out of the scriptures for the week, and then based on what sort of concept they're trying to get across or overarching theme, and then becomes our job as the musicians to sort of fill that in and broaden it and play with it and make it all sort of become cohesive through the music. So John works really hard to find preludes and postludes and other organ music that fits in with the theme somehow, and then I try to find creative ways to make the hymns and the rest of the music also pull that theme together. Or sometimes, it's more like contrast too. It's not just if the theme is getting along or community or brotherhood or something. Sometimes we might try to do a piece of music that actually is about not getting along or not being in good community, or the post is sort of something that's a little out of place. There, okay. It's getting distracting. So yeah, it's both a challenge and a great opportunity, the fact that our services are different every week. Yeah, we do have a certain sort of outline that we follow, but it's not always predictable. And so depending on what the pastors are doing and what sort of theme they come up with, we have a great opportunity to sort of pull on all sorts of different kinds of music and styles and genres and time periods to sort of just play around with those different themes and weave it all together in hopefully an interesting way. I mean, they can't all be winners, so it's not always going to be interesting every week. But I try, that's the goal, is that I just don't want to phone things in and do always what's expected. I try to sometimes do things that are unexpected, just because music has power. It's a very different window into our psyches and into our spirits. Sometimes music is the one thing that can take us out of ourselves and help us to connect with an emotion, a feeling, a memory that we need to connect with. I mean, that's why we go to church, is to be more connected to ourselves and to our community and to God. And the words are very important, but it is often the music that unlocks things for us. So, yeah, we take that really seriously, trying to find music that is going to hopefully unlock something in all of us week after week.
Thank you. If you had not gone the path of being a musician, do you have any sense of what you might have done?
Oh, for sure. I wanted to be an architect. In fact, I wanted to be an architect for much longer than I wanted to be a musician as a kid. Through a good portion of high school, I was still convinced. Now, granted, I had absolutely no ability in math, and no real propensity for any of the skills that I think architects need in terms of engineering and practical concepts, but I loved art. architecture, and they still do. I'm really interested in it and passionate about it. So yeah, I would have been an architect. I don't think I would have been a good one, but I wanted to do it.
Well, it's interesting. It's another form of impacting people, and much more visual than audio.
Right,
That
visual.
it is.
Yeah, there are some similarities.
Right.
I mean, there are definitely similarities between composing and being an architect. So I kind of see how that part of my brain connects to that.
Right. So what is bringing you joy these days? Where are you turning for joy, or what's bringing you joy? What's inspiring you these days?
Well, lots of things. You know, we've had an interesting couple of years in the world. If we go back a little further, it's been an interesting, 5, 6 years. There's been a lot going on in the world, and a lot of reasons to not feel joy. And I've definitely fallen prey to some not happy feelings, some depression, some things that I think a lot of people have been going through for many obvious reasons. But in the last year or so, since we've been getting back to live singing and actually being together as a community, that is a huge source of joy. The whole dark time of not being together in person and having to do videos was draining and hard, and I don't miss that at all. So being with people and making music together has been a huge source of joy. Just being together as a staff and getting to be in the building with my colleagues has been joyful. The last time I sat in this seat was because I was getting married in here exactly 1 month before the pandemic started. So that has been bringing me a lot of joy. Being married is really cool. That's been probably my biggest source of joy. It's just been all the time I get to spend with Tony and the adventure of getting to know with him and blending our lives together and meeting all the people that are a part of his life and sharing the people that are a part of mine with him. So that's number one, for sure.
And Tony is an author, or a writer, and so I often thought to myself, music and lyrics, at some point.
I definitely think there's a collaboration
Yes.
in our future.
Yes.
We've talked about it.
Fashion show.
What's that?
Fashion show.
All right, well, let's now open it up to all of you, and we'll take a couple of questions. Just raise your hand, and then I'll repeat your question. Fran.
So how did you, even if you didn't love it, we loved it, that you were a digital wizard, how did you learn all that stuff to make when we were online and you
The videos.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, so the question was, it's a great question, because we didn't anticipate, when we interviewed Michael, we never anticipated that we would just be having online services. So Fran was wondering, how did he become such a digital wizard in helping create all of our online services during the pandemic?
I think this is sort of a window into the darker side of my professional psyche, in that I am a little bit of a perfectionist, and I'm a 1, as Marcy would insist I let you know, on the Enneagram scale. So when the pandemic first started and we were doing those little services with live streaming, like just the soloists were coming and the pastors, and we did that for a couple months, and then we kind of thought, well, this probably isn't safe either, so now we have to not have anyone in the building. What are we going to do? And we realized we had 2 options. We could do Zoom at that point, which a couple churches had started doing, having live services where everyone is on Zoom, or we could do some sort of pre-recorded video. And we all agreed that we didn't want to do Zoom because we just didn't feel like it was the right format for our church, and that we wouldn't really be able to do very good music, and that would be disappointing. And we could maybe find a way to be a little more creative and do the kind of content we wanted to with the video. And then everyone was like, well, does anybody know how to do a video? And I was the only person who raised their hand and said that I had done a few videos and had a tiny little bit of ability as an editor. So I said, okay, I think I could try to put something together this first week. I think this was like on a Monday or a Tuesday, the week of our first video. And so I raised my hand and I said I would do it. And I was assuming I was volunteering for 4 weeks or something. That was my assumption. And it turned into 15 months, but not that I was counting. I don't know, I had done a little bit of video editing for some of my own personal projects, I had a couple recordings from pieces of mine that had been premiered that I only had audio. So I wanted to put something on YouTube, and I had to create a video to go with the audio so that there was something to look at. So I had just done some rudimentary editing, and I guess I just kind of dove in. But that first week when we decided we were going to do a video service, I looked online and I did some research, and I found a video editing software that sounded like it was fairly easy to learn, and I could do it quickly, and it turns out it was fairly easy to learn. And I just had that idea to make a little video like I was walking to church, because I thought that's the thing everyone is missing. So that just sort of started it off. And John dove right in and started making recordings at home. And at that point, I could only figure out how to put one person on the screen at a time. So we didn't have any sort of virtual quartet doing the hymns or anything. It took me a few weeks to figure that out. But mostly it was just a process of teaching myself. I would look at something in a video and say, I wonder how you do that. And so I would go online and see if I could find anyone who did a tutorial to teach you how to do that. And then the video software we were using had some tutorials built into it that I could watch videos to learn things. And because I'm a perfectionist, this was sort of like a perfect storm of practical needs meets the worst part of my personality. So we needed to make videos, and I needed them to be perfect. So I was not going to put out something that I thought was lousy. So I spent hours and hours and hours teaching myself how to do things so that it would look better and sound better. And I don't regret a minute of it, and I'm also immensely pleased that I'm no longer doing it. So,
well, thank you. Thank you very much. We all sincerely love that. Is there another question?
She's trying to ask something.
Oh, Jasmine, did you have a question?
Speaking of joy, can you share how you met Tony?
Oh, the question was, could Michael share how he met his husband, Tony?
It's not very interesting. We met online in a dating website, like that people use now, an app. But when we did meet online, he was actually, he was still writing about fashion mostly at the Chronicle, and he was actually in New York for Fashion Week. So we got to know each other through texts, basically, over the course of 10 days. And then finally flew back to San Francisco, and we met in person for the first time, which was really weird after getting to know each other on the phone for a week. And basically, he sort of came home and then never left. So it just happened really fast. So yeah, it was good. But yes, we met on an app. Not very interesting.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, you spent so many years in the East. Was it difficult to come out West?
So the question, oh, sorry.
You knew a lot of people and your experience was there and so forth.
So the question Tom asked was, after spending so many years in the East, and particularly in the New York area, was it difficult to come out here and leave a lot of those connections and networks and move out here?
It was actually kind of difficult. The journey that ended up with my coming here was because I I was at kind of a low place in my life personally. This was like in 2014. I went through a really terrible relationship and a bad breakup, and yeah, it was just a lot of things. I was kind of in a low place, and a person I knew, a friend who was a member of my church at that time in New York, had put my name in as a candidate for this program called Interlude, which is a mid-career retreat for church musicians that's put on by an amazing musician named Ken Miedema, who's a wonderful blind pianist and singer and composer. Him and a wonderful woman named Paula Darcy, who's an inspirational speaker, and they put on these retreats for church musicians, and it's supposed to be like in the middle of your career, a chance to sort of reset things. And it was at Calvary College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So I was there for a few days. It was like a long weekend. And it was just an amazing experience and really beautiful, beautiful thing, how they put it on. It was so meaningful. And one thing that really stuck with me at this retreat was Paula had this imagery that your life is like a wheel, and there are all sorts of things going on these various spokes of these wheels that surround your life, and that too often we allow ourselves to be positioned somewhere on the spinning wheel of our life. And so we are just out there where everything is spinning and everything is out of control and just rotating around you. And so you can't get any perspective on your life when you're out there on the spokes. And the thing we have to do to have a healthy life is to put ourselves in the center of the wheel, where everything is spinning around us, but we can control what we choose to interact with and how we interact with it, and where you have control, some control. Of course, we don't have control of everything in our lives at any point, but if you put yourself in the center of the wheel instead of out where everything is spinning, you get perspective. And that really stuck with me, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and after trying to put myself in the center of the wheel, I realized that I was just tired of what I was doing. And being a freelance musician is just exhausting, and running around, and I just decided I wanted to make a change, and I wanted to try to see if I could find a job instead of 8 jobs. At some point I started Googling, and I think about January of 2015, I saw this ad from Calvary, and I thought, wow, that sounds like it was written for me. Like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And even then, I debated. I was like, oh, San Francisco, I don't want to go there. Why would I want to go to San Francisco? It's all the way on the other side of the country. It's even more expensive than New York, which is not solving any of my problems. But something just kept drawing me back to this ad, and I finally decided I should apply. And the rest is kind of history. It ended up being a really beautiful experience applying, and eventually I felt called to this place, and the rest is history. So it was a very difficult decision to leave, but it ended up being a beautiful experience doing it. It was the right time to go, and I'm so pleased that I came. So.
And I remember you saying that you thought long and hard about it before you even applied.
Yeah,
You didn't apply unless you really were sort of had committed to, if it happens, then I will go. All right. I think we have time for one more question, if there is one. Yes, Natalia.
Hi, first of all, I want to thank for this wonderful interview. And my question is, we heard a lot of wonderful things about Michael's past, about Michael's current, about now, and what is your ambitions for future? What is your plans? So maybe you have some specific concertos that you want to perform in future. So any thoughts about?
Okay, that's a wonderful question to end with. Natalie commented that we've heard a lot about his past and about the present, And does he have any desires for the future? Is there anything that he's eager to do in the future, whether it's composing or performing something?
As long as it's here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I want to stay here. I have no interest in going anywhere. Certainly not in the short term. Long term, who knows? I guess professionally, so a lot of my goals are around my career as a composer, which in a lot of ways has always kind of been in the back seat compared to my what pays the bills, which is, being a performer and a conductor and a teacher and a choir director and a church musician. Those things have been the focus of my work, and my composition has always sort of had to take a little bit of a back seat. And my biggest goal going forward is that I find ways to be a little more particular about reaching some of my goals as a composer. I am published, but I have not even begun to scratch the surface of what I would like to get published, and that's entirely all my fault. Like, I actually have outlets to do that. It's just, it takes a lot of time to get things ready for publication and to go through the process of editing and getting things out there. And so I want to do a lot more publishing, because I have a lot of music I would love for people to hear, and it takes sort of a commitment to making that happen. And I have a lot of things I want to write. So I've been saying for like 10 years now that I'm writing an opera based on the life of Frank Lloyd Wright, and so far I just have an outline. So I really want to focus on writing that opera finally, because it's just been boiling inside for a long time. And hopefully that'll come out, and a lot of other things. So I think, I don't want to spend all day talking about it, because I could tell you all the things I want to do with my life, and there are many, but I think a lot of it revolves around focusing on my work as a composer. And fortunately, I work in a really supportive, amazing place that does give me the freedom to also focus on that part of my career. I mean, it was partly why they hired me here, is that I did write and arrange, and they valued those skills and encouraged me to continue with them. So I'm just really lucky to have this job that gives me the freedom to also focus on that part of my work. So I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you, Michael. Is there anything else you would like to share? You can have the last word here.
No, I can't think. I think that's more than enough. So thank you all for coming and listening, and thank you, Jennifer, for being such a great host. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. I also want to remind you that there is one more discussion like this next week, and it is with our outstanding organist, John Walker. He too has a very interesting past, and he knows things about our instruments here that some parts of our instruments have traveled the Bay Area. So if you would like to hear more about John and some of our instruments, be sure to come next week. So thank you, Michael. We really, really appreciate it, and thank you all for listening.